Congrats on getting beyond $1 million. What got you here won't always get you there. This is a podcast for entrepreneurs who want to reach beyond their 7-figure business and scale to 8, 9, and even 10 figures. I'm Brad Weimert, and as the founder of Easy Pay Direct, I have had the privilege to work with more than 30,000 businesses, allowing me to see the data behind what some of the most successful companies on the planet are doing differently. Join me each week as I dig in with experts in sales, marketing, operations, technology, and wealth building. And you'll learn some of the specific tools, tactics, and strategies that are working today in those multi-million, 8, 9, and 10-figure businesses. Life can get exciting beyond $1 million. Alex Charfen, I really appreciate you showing up, man. It's great to see you in person.
Brad, thanks for having me, man. This place is so awesome. I'm impressed.
I love it. Yeah, this is my lounge spot and my happy place.
Yeah.
Yes, I get to escape and hang out with cool people and talk about great stuff.
Yeah, I've been in a ton of studios. This may be one of my favorite.
Well, we will, as we were saying before we turned it on, at some point are going to have to rebuild pretty soon because I sold the building. So
yeah,
it was. I started it by saying that it was a mixed bag, and I was, quickly corrected in my own mind with no, it's pretty fucking great.
It wasn't that bad.
No, it was pretty fucking great.
Well, and then you get to do this again, and so I can't wait to see what the next space is like because there is a ton of creativity here.
I love it. Yeah, it's I was talking about this earlier today, but the environments that I am in I didn't think that they mattered to me when I was younger. I had this sort of mind over everything else mentality. And as I get older, I realize that if I can create the environment to build triggers so that my emotions are triggered, right? And my thoughts are triggered by being there, everything about it's better.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think when I was younger, I was the same way. Like it was mind over everything. So like I worked on 2 filing cabinets with a door for a long time. Like literally a door.
Me too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Same desk?
Yeah.
I think a lot of us had that desk.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy how many people I've shared that with and they're like, wait a second, I did the same thing.
100%.
And so I went from that where like I didn't pay attention to the chair, the desk, anything. And then I got to this point where I realized it just wasn't comfortable. Like I was uncomfortable. And so I was telling you earlier, I built a standing desk like 25 years ago before they were even a thing, because I started feeling like, man, if I'm higher and I'm standing up, I feel more engaged, I feel more present. And now environment's everything to me. Like I've obsessed over every inch of our house. We've remodeled every room. We took all the noise out of it. And so that the things that should stand out. And when you do that, you're right. When you have triggers like visual cues of artwork or a space that you really care about, like the wallpaper in my office is something I'm really into. So like all those triggers kind of heighten sensitivity and heighten awareness. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. And you can evoke certain emotional responses by doing that or certain thought patterns. And the wallpaper, by the way, wallpaper in here is one of my favorite things.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Yeah, I think, I think a lot of entrepreneurs discount how much environment can get you into state.
Totally.
And, if can you do it without the environment? Of course you can. Like we all can. But why spend the decision-making fatigue? Why spend the calories in the brain to be able to do that? If you can set up the environment to put you there, you're ahead of a lot of other people. So
I look at that like setting your shoes and workout clothes out in the morning so that when you wake up, they're there ready to go.
Yeah, there's no resistance.
Yeah, it makes it easier. And if you can eliminate those things that get in your way, the resistance, you're more likely to do it.
Yeah, 100%.
And I never had problems with that one. I got that pattern going really early. But there are tons of other things that's just, get it in front of you.
Yeah, I would never assume you had problems with that one.
Well,
it was super funny a few months ago when I was in a conversation at an event. I think I shared this with you, and people were talking about doing some challenge where you like run the height of, or you climb Everest in a week or something like that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I think it was
it's 29:029.
Yeah, and
I have done this a few times.
Well, and the conversation was, I did it, and I went with a bunch of friends, and there was one guy there who did it twice while all of us did it once. And I'm like, was his name Brad? He's like, how did you know? I'm like, just guessed. I just guessed. I'm like, because there's one guy in the world I know who would do that. It's Brad Weimert.
Yeah. Yep. This is true. This is true. That is, I still have a site up that has a little clip of it. It's everestingx2.com.
Yeah.
And it was, ultimately it was triggered by drunken bet. As they are. because no good stories start with salad.
Right. Super funny.
So, all right. So Alex, we've known each other for a few years, and oddly, I think we connected through NewFit.
Yep.
Which is how do you explain NewFit?
NewFit is, how do you explain NewFit? NewFit is, the technology behind NewFit is electromuscular stimulation. And so you pass direct current through your muscles so that they flex, a lot like Bruce Lee used to do with the car batteries, only way more comfortable. And it's like one of the best rehab workout, functional activities I've ever done. I actually have one of the units in my house. Yeah. And Garrett Salpeter, who put all of that together, is just genius.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's, I think that for me, the direct current is the differentiator with electrical stimulation versus like a TENS unit.
100%.
Which is alternating current.
Yeah.
And then the other is knowing what you're doing with it.
Yeah.
And Garrett being the administrator, he's now taught, a fleet of people how to do this, but had a lot to do with it too. So you were rehabbing an injury, and I was also but we would get mornings to talk in there and see each other. In Austin, and that's how I got to know you. But you've had an awesome entrepreneurial journey, and are continuing to.
Yeah.
The thing that stuck out to me immediately. So I want to get into today and get into operations because that's your focus right now. But you can fill in the blanks here, but one of the things that I found fascinating was Easy Pay Direct has probably, I want to call it, 13 to 15% of our audience of our clients are people selling information. And the model with that typically is some low dollar thing that goes into some mid-dollar membership course that goes to a live event for a few grand, that goes to coaching for 10 to 50 grand.
Yeah.
These are kind of the tiers. And you look at the Tony Robbins, the Grant Cardone, the Dean Graziosi, the Fortune Builders, real estate people. That's the model. But the other path that is education are universities, right? Or certification programs.
Yeah.
And so tell me about the certification program. Give me a little backdrop on that, because I think that's such a cool story and such an amazing way to shift the notion of information and sell information.
So in 2007, my wife Katie and I lived in South Florida, and we were in real estate. We operated 3 real estate companies. We had an acquisition company, a management company, and then a company that held properties. And if you have any knowledge of what happened 2007, 2008, by the end of 2007, we were bankrupt. We thought we were going to retire. Like beginning 2007, it's like, man, we could check out. We don't need to do anything anymore.
Ouch.
We got so much equity, so much cash. Really, it started in 2006 for us because there was Wilma and Katrina, which burned through a ton of cash. Then the market imploded, and we found ourselves losing everything, like literally all the properties, the companies, cash flow, everything. And I got really frustrated with that happening. Like, how did this happen to us, and why did it happen to us? And we were conservative investors. We didn't have like 90% loans on anything. We had a ton of equity in our portfolio. And still, because the market turned upside down so far, like, we had properties that were worth $150,000 to $180,000. The one that sold the least was for $15,500.
Oh my God.
So like 90% losses in South Florida real estate in some of our properties. Portfolio overall went down over half. And when I started doing the research and looking at what was going on, what I was seeing was that we were in a massive crisis. And what the market was saying, what the National Association of Realtors was saying, what the major banks, brokerages were saying, was that it was like a 6 month to a year crisis. And there was no way. And so I started doing a ton of research on it, talking to a bunch of real estate agents. And I saw this opportunity to put together a course to help realtors help homeowners who were in distress. A lot of the stuff that Katie and I had done was working with homeowners that were in foreclosure, homeowners that were in probate, people who had really bad property damage and couldn't pay for it. So we had worked with a lot of distressed homeowners up till then. And so we put together this body of content that was going to just be a class. And about halfway through, I started seeing the opportunity to turn it into a certification, because realtors were going to have to differentiate themselves in the market. So we created a product called the Certified Distressed Property Expert. We did some few sales in 2017, but really in 2007. In 2008, we taught our first class. It was to 62 students in South Florida. We were going through bankruptcy. So like the room was like, we were going to pay later. The Kinko's was, we were going to pay later. We had some relationships. And so we literally had to collect money in the class in order to pay for everything. And the first 62 students graduated. A couple of them hooked us up with other people. In our first year, we trained about 1,500 people. We did about $500,000 in business. It went 127,000, $500,000, 7.2 million, 9.97 million. It was like this breakaway growth. And I think, it was definitely because the market needed a solution, but I think the way that we packaged it, where it was checklist easy, it was a certification, it let people differentiate themselves by buying our course, that had a lot to do with it. And over the course of the 7 or 8 years that we were really selling that product a lot, we went from arguing with the major brokerages and the banks and a lot of the organizations out there like Freddie and Fannie, because they were all saying that like this was going to resolve itself. And I was one of the few voices saying there's no way it's going to resolve itself. So they went from criticizing us and calling me Chicken Little to 2009, 2010. We were working with RE/MAX, Century 21, Prudential, all the major brokerages, Keller Williams regionally. We were working with Fannie and Freddie. I actually went and trained some people in both of those organizations. Awesome. It was a huge flip, and it was really intense.
Yeah, that was a wild time.
Yeah.
So I want to, you mentioned a number of operations things in there, which is checklist easy. But from a marketing position, the other thing that jumped out was positioning it for what the agents were going to get out of it. So, and how it would allow them to differentiate in their space.
Yeah.
What was the angle to get the RE/MAX, the Keller Williams, the big brokerages on board?
So,
and did they get paid? Did they take a portion of the revenue for that?
Yeah, everybody that we worked with, we had kind of a partner program with companies like RE/MAX, but it paid off like crazy. So I built a relationship with Dave Liniger, the former chairman and CEO of RE/MAX, founder. He's no longer there; he retired, but still maintains a ton of the stock. And the angle was all of the brokerages were caught off guard. Nobody expected that it would go from a retail sales market to a distressed sales market as fast as it did. It was really like a 6-month swing that you could see the numbers across the country, and really, 6 months swing where you could see it in the major markets and the coasts. And then within about 14 months, every market was feeling it. And we were there, people say we were there at the right place at the right time. Bankrupt in a rented condo, barely paying our bills, didn't feel like the right place at the right time. But what happened was our product was put together in a very operationally sound way. And so we didn't just teach information. We gave realtors all the tools that they needed for a step-by-step process so that they could meet with somebody who was in distress and present that package to the bank. And what happened was, in the first year or two, banks actually started treating our agents preferentially. If you submitted the package on our forums and our resources, you got closed a lot quicker. Things happened faster. And so a couple of agents recommended us to RE/MAX. I went up there, met with Dave and with the executive team at RE/MAX, and Brad, at one point, he ended up hopping on a private jet and going to like 17 different cities and selling our product.
Wow.
So there was absolutely a partner program there, but it was amazing. He made the commitment to me in our first meeting that he was going to put 10,000 people through our program. And so I'm sitting there, we had just gone bankrupt, hadn't really built up our cash reserves again. And in the meeting, I'm like calculating in my head what 10,000 would look like. And it ended up with Katie and I actually having $1 million net profit day. Wow. When we put it on RE/MAX University. It was the highest selling course they had ever had in a single day at RE/MAX University. We did 1,500 people in a day.
Wow.
Or 1,800 people in a day. It was awesome.
What were they doing to push that out to? And this is a little bit selfish because we have a strategic partnership program. And one of the challenges with partnership programs in general is getting engagement, right? So you can sell the partner, but they still need to sell their audience, right? Like truly, they need to get it in front of their audience. They need to reiterate it. They need to push the value proposition. What was he doing to promote the product? What was his message to the agents?
Well, we built that message for them. Yeah. And well, here's what we started with was, in our sales, we sold the agent on why they could sell themselves having the designation. And so whenever we were having the discussion, it was differentiate yourself, get more referrals, be part of our referral network with CDPs across the country, stand out more when you're, and we actually showed agents how to talk to a homeowner about our product. So it was like, you're going to make this investment, but then when you sit down with anybody that you sit down with, here's how you present yourself. And here's how you share with them. You're part of a nationwide organization of real estate agents from every brokerage that are sharing information and understanding this market and have better skill sets and better processes to get your deal closed. And so Dave would mirror that information when he went out. And we started surveying our agents probably in about late 2009, early 2010, I think was the time frame. So we had a couple years of sales under our belts, but we would survey and say, like, how long does it take you to close a sale before? How long does it take now? How many referrals are you getting before? How many referrals are you getting now? And we would just take those differentiators and we would publish the survey data so that we had like legitimate numbers. But we would say, the average CDP agent closes 7 times as many deals, gets 3 times as many referrals, closes their short sales in about 50% of the time. It was 48% of the time. And so we had published data, and then we used that data as the sales pitch. And so it's one of those things where, you can use numbers as long as you can back them up. And so we always had a sufficient representative sample of our agents. So if we had 6,000 agents at the time, we tried to get about 10% to answer a survey, and then we'd extrapolate that out to the larger population.
I like that. Yeah. In the world of information, that's how you validate a good product.
100%.
Or not.
Yeah.
And
a lot of people are afraid to do it though, because they're afraid of the answers. And if you are, you got to go back and work on the product.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%. And short of doing that, longevity in the space is another indicator, right? You can exist for a while with a bullshit product.
Yeah.
But you can't do it for decades.
Yeah. No.
No. So when people critique Tony Robbins because they don't know anything about him and they see this rah person in front of everybody, my answer is usually you can have whatever opinion you want, but to exist in that space for 40 years, he's making somebody happy.
Yeah,
right?
I'm 49. I went to my first Tony Robbins conference at 19.
Right.
So,
right.
And it's basically the same product.
100%.
Improved and bigger rooms and all that, but it's basically the same product.
Same general information.
Yeah. Right? Same coals.
Yes. Yeah. Same coals on your feet. Right. Different diet now though, because he got
dramatically different diet.
Different diet right now.
Yeah. I think a lot of people fall off of that original diet he had.
Yes. Yes. Well, we as a society seem to learn different things about diet as time goes on.
Yeah.
And I think it's cyclical too. Like when I talk to my parents about their upbringing and what they were taught was healthy or not healthy, we run in these cycles of, dairy is good or bad, meat is good or bad, fat is good or bad, and why, right? And the reasons why I think change, but
yeah. Well, and today, if you want to prove any one of those, you can get all the proof you need to prove each one individually and against each other. And it's really what works best for you.
100%. Yeah. 100%. That's the, how to lie with statistics narrative.
Yeah, 100%. You can prove any case you want right now by just going to Google.
Yeah, for sure. And you can find an expert that teaches you one thing or the other.
If you want an expert that says you just eat fruit all day, they're there. Meat all day. They're like, whatever diet you want, you can justify it.
I love that. So, okay. So you told me just before we started too, that you actually this was 2007 that you started this, and you just sold that company a year ago?
In the last year, yeah. We actually sold it to one of the instructors. The instructor that we had that did the most business, he now owns a group of brokerages. And so he bought it, and we made a deal with him where we have a lifetime royalty. We're still somewhat involved, not in the management or anything like that, occasionally advising. And he's going to grow that business. I had a lot of people in the real estate industry come to me and say, hey, let's do this again. It's coming. You can see it's coming. Are you going to do the CDP again? And I'm so passionate about what we do now. And I really love helping visionary entrepreneurs and not just one type of avatar, not just real estate agents. And so I wanted the CDP to continue. In total, we trained about almost 50,000 agents. So it's the largest designation in the history of real estate. And so we wanted somebody who really cared about it to move it forward. And so, Tony Martinez out in Florida is doing that for us.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So the thing that you're passionate about now, tell me about the existing business, and also kind of what's the iteration of that been? Because when we first connected, whenever that was 5, 6, 7 years ago, different name, but same fundamental idea, which was how do I help visionary entrepreneurs grow and be better at what they're doing?
So the name of the company now is Simple Operations, and we exist to help visionary entrepreneurs take their vision and bring it into reality. And, when you look at like the growth that we had with CDPE, if we didn't have some of the systems that we train today, there's no way we would have been able to do it. Mm-hmm. We went from 2 people, Katie and I, in 2008 to 100 people in 2010. Wow. And that type of, and we were the 21st, we were bankrupt in 2007. We were number 21 on the Inc. 500 list in 2011.
Wow.
And so when you have that type of rapid growth, there has to be process and structure and systems in order to be able to grow like that. And so we used a lot of what we train today, but really starting in about 2011, we started to have agents who we trained come to us and say, hey, we're using your stuff, but now my business is bigger than it ever has been. Everything's breaking. I'm letting people down. Like, how do you do this? How do you grow a business? And so CDPE was probably my 5th or 6th multi-million-dollar company that I had grown using structure. I'm one of those people that gets overwhelmed quickly. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that can carry everything around in their head, and I can kind of do that, but to the detriment of everything else. Yeah. And so having a process where we planned in a really clear way, where we executed in a clear way, where communication was systematic rather than sporadic, made it so that I could run a large business without feeling overwhelmed all the time. With CDP, in all honesty, there was still a ton of overwhelm. Like when it grows that fast, I was flying all over the country, but we kept the wheels on and we kept the doors on the car. Yeah. And it was because we had that process and structure. So in 2011, we started a course called LEAD. LEAD, which I thought was such a great course, but then everybody called it lead, and like the name was horrible. But that was really the origination of what we teach today. So it's been about 11 years of teaching 3 disciplines. It's planning, communicating within a structure, and leadership. And really, leadership comes last, because once you have clear planning in a business, so everybody knows where you're going, and a clear communication structure, so everyone knows when they're going to hear, what they're going to hear, and it becomes routine and expected, then you can really step out of management and step into leadership. Mm. And so the origin was 2011. Coming out of CDP, we named the company Charfen, and I didn't realize what a detriment it was to have a personal brand, because what people eventually told us was if they were going to take on our product and teach it to their team, they first had to sell, hey, we're going to do this thing. And then they had to sell what Charfen was. Mm-hmm. So we rebranded a year ago to simpleoperations.com so that people would understand what we did. And I got the best feedback within a couple months. We had somebody who was on the fence about joining our program, then joined our program and said, you know what? The reason I joined was before I was trying to tell him who Alex Charfen was, and my team was just not buying in. And when I came in and said, okay, we're talking to a company called Simple Operations, everybody was like, yes. And so we rebranded to simpleoperations.com, and it's basically the same materials, significantly involved now that we've had thousands of entrepreneurs that have gone through the program and given us feedback, and we've really tightened it up to the point where people can come in and get it executed and get it installed in their company. And we help them install what we call the Simple Operation System, SOS. Mm. And it's a system where the 3 disciplines that I just talked about become predictable, rather than trying to figure out, like, what are we going to do next? And how do we tell everybody about it? And what do I do next as the person in charge? We build massive predictability into those structures.
Awesome. That's a great summary, and also a great lesson on branding.
Yeah, dude. I had no idea how much it was holding us back. Yeah.
So there are, let's start with, I want to dig into some of the nuances of it, because I think that the tactics that are involved in those systems are incredibly relevant.
Yeah.
And I also think that first and foremost, having a fucking system to run your business
100%
is the foundation.
Yeah.
So how fundamentally, we look at, sort of EOS or Rockefeller habits or I don't know, pick another framework, right?
Yeah, there's a few out there.
There's a few out there, and I know people that run, at least in part, on these systems. And most people that I know are not very good at adopting the whole system.
Yeah.
They'll grab some of it and they'll adapt as they see fit.
Yeah.
But why this versus running another one?
So the other systems that you named are good systems. One of the things that we focus on a tremendous amount is on having a planning system where the team's actually involved, and it's not 2-day offsites every quarter. It's actually a much lighter weight planning system, because here's the issue for most visionary entrepreneurs is that they are the biggest bottleneck in the business. Mm-hmm. And until there's a strategic plan that they can share with their team, they're pretty much committed to being that bottleneck, because if your team doesn't know where you're going, they have to ask you where they're going next. And so where we put a tremendous amount of focus is on supporting that visionary entrepreneur, but also integrating them with the team. See, I think one of the most important things for us as visionaries is that we can communicate and be heard. And I think in most organizations, that's one of the biggest issues is the visionary has all these ideas that are perfect and they're amazing and they can already see them coming to reality, but they have a hard time communicating to the team in a way that they get heard and those ideas get executed. Mm-hmm. And in some of the other systems you mentioned, the solution is visionary and then what they call an integrator or something else, and then everybody else. Mm-hmm. And so you have to find this magic person that they actually call a unicorn called an integrator. And that person runs the entire business. Well, we've been doing this now for about 11 years. I've been coaching and working with entrepreneurs through CDP or through the other businesses that I own for a lot longer than that. And if the visionary isn't integrated into the team in a way that they're comfortable, that person who runs the business is the biggest liability. And
the integrator in this
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Meaning that if they disappear,
something happens to them, they disappear, they have a baby, they decide they don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
We recently started working with a company that was around, I think about 9 million when they started with us. And the reason they came is they had been in that structure. They just lost their integrator and they realized just what a massive liability it was.
Yeah.
Because the integrator had some family issues, had to leave the business, didn't want to, was really upset about it, was going to be available and on call, but they realized you pull that person out and literally that is the structure of the business. Right. And so the converse of that is in our system, there is process all the way from 1 year down to the day to day. So every member of the team is fully utilized. There's a structure for every single person that works on the team. And so if you lose any person, including the integrator or what we call the operator, you can plug and play somebody else there. And it doesn't have to be this unicorn person that's 1 in a million. It just has to be somebody with talent and with a skill set and believes in what you're doing and is right for that position. And with the structure, we take people that in some organizations might look like B players. And when they have the right structure and support around them, they look like A players.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's no question that inside the walls of a good system, the purpose, one of the purposes is to handle or account for human insufficiency.
Yeah. Well, just human.
Yeah. That's
right.
Yes.
Just being human.
Yes. Right. Yeah. It's inevitable. Right. Yeah. We all have, I guess, deficiency is we're not robots. Right.
Yeah,
so 100%. We have things pop up, which is why things which is why the franchise model, why McDonald's crushes.
Yeah.
Because it's, you can throw anybody in a McDonald's to push the buttons.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? That's the goal. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, McDonald's crushes also with people who are willing to follow rigorous process and rigorous structure. When you look at early on, McDonald's was, they actually started to try not to sell to visionary entrepreneurs. They wanted to sell to farmers because farmers were people who was like, okay, you do this here, you do this here. They'll follow the structure and the process. And so the franchise model does really well with people who are willing to do that. Mm-hmm. Now, in most visionary businesses, there's so little structure that it's and as visionaries, there's a spectrum, right? And I think when you look at visionary entrepreneurs that are out on the end of the spectrum where it's they see things other people don't see, they see opportunity that other people can't even realize. Yeah. They see, where the gaps in the market are. Those types of visionaries typically have a very hard time communicating that to the people around them. In fact, when I think of the visionary personality type or the entrepreneurial personality type, that's the book I wrote on the EPT. It's someone who goes into the future, creates a new reality, comes back to the present, and then demands it becomes real. But the challenge is communicating that perfect future to the people around them is really difficult. And that's one of the big gaps that we help fill.
So tell me about, so we've got planning process, communication, and what was the third thing?
Leadership.
Yeah. So let's talk about the planning process a little bit with this, because highly relevant. So, and again, we've got 1,000 different structures for this. A mutual friend, Cameron Harold, has a book, The Vivid Vision, that I just had a conversation about yesterday, because a friend of mine met somebody that attributes his he raised 100 million and bought 500 million in real estate last year. And he attributes it to building this vivid vision. And my response was, man, I have a hell of a time, locking myself away for 3 days to create this vivid vision for 3 years.
Yeah.
Which is Cameron's approach to things. There's no question that once a vision is laid out and articulated cleanly, which is what you just said, right? They have a hard time articulating it, that it gives sort of the guide rails and the North Star to the rest of the team. But the planning process to get there is troubling for me, I'll say.
Yeah.
So what are the tenets of your planning process?
So, when we look at so Brad, we work with a lot of companies that are right around that $1 million mark up into the tens of millions. But the majority of the companies that come to us are somewhere between, say, 1 and 10, but really even to narrow that down, 1 and 3. And when you're at 1 and 3, between 1 and 3 million, it's one of the hardest phases of business to run. $1 million businesses are very difficult to run. You created enough exposure that you're doing $1 million in business, but you typically don't have the revenue or the profitability to go hire a leadership team around you to run the company.
Right.
And so you're in this place where, there's a ton of responsibility, but not a lot of resources and not a lot of dollars to invest. And so most of the people that come to us are in this place where they're like, I'm overwhelmed. I'm doing everything. I'm working way too much. I have a few team members, but they're letting me down. They don't take initiative. They're not doing what I want them to do. I feel like I'm correcting things all the time. I'm just putting out fires. I'm starting to feel burned out, and I feel like I'm at risk every day. That's who's coming to us. And if we said, okay, well, let's take the next 72 hours and think about 3 years from now, some of them would have a breakdown just over that suggestion, And so I love that process once you've established some stability in the business. But here's the fact. The reality is that most entrepreneurs have never successfully predicted what they're going to do in a week.
Yeah.
And most have never successfully predicted a month or a quarter. And a year is so far afield that a lot of times we just get into that place. It's like, shoot for the stars and you'll land on the moon if you miss. Which really, that statement frustrates me. I have this whole theory of, like, as entrepreneurs, once you build the team, once you have a company, pull the target closer. Like, pull it to something that in a year you're going to win. And everybody feels like they're winning. And when we have entrepreneurs pull the target closer, oftentimes what happens is the team far exceeds the target. When they, are at $1 million business and they go through some goal setting workshop, and so they set the goal for 10 million the next year, the team just walks around feeling defeated, like the goals don't mean anything. If you shoot for the stars and you miss, chances are you're not going to land on the moon. Chances are you're going to be floating around in space, like frozen without oxygen. And so, like, let's get real about how we behave as entrepreneurs. I think we've had this entire dogma in the entrepreneurial world that if you're not setting unrealistic goals, then they don't matter. Well, in working with now thousands of companies, when we can get entrepreneurs to take a step back, pull the target closer, establish a goal where the team's going to win for the year, you go from teaching your team how to lose gracefully to having a team that walks around with their chest poked out because, hey, we're winning. And you go from trying to tell everybody on a monthly basis, hey, it's going to be okay, to the team telling you, hey, we're going to do better than you think. And so that's a lot of our practice is building realism into the planning process. And when I say this, I think a lot of entrepreneurs go, oh, well, then nobody's growing that fast. Well, I mean, we've had companies that we worked with that have gone from 2 to 30 million in a 3 or 4 year time span. And not just one. We've had tons of companies go from the low millions into the tens of millions, but it's because they established this pattern of winning. They established this pattern where the team actually believes in the goals. And once you successfully have planned a year where your team has accomplished it, the next year they trust it even more. And so you get a lot more discretionary effort from people. You get a lot more excitement out of people. And so a lot of what we do is helping entrepreneurs plan in a way that the people around them can actually understand it and go out and win.
Yeah, I love the mentality of achievable goals.
Yeah.
And sort of a goal and a stretch goal.
Yeah.
I think it's, and I'd love your thoughts on this. I think it's particularly relevant to bootstrapped entrepreneurs. One of the things that you mentioned were the constraints around resources when you're sitting at $1 million. And obviously every business model is different. So, if you're at $1 million or $2 million and you have, a 60 or 70% margin, that's different than being at $1 million or $2 million and having a 8% margin.
Yeah.
Like very different.
100%.
But if you are funded, then it's almost irrelevant, because if you're funded, you do not have the constraints that you had otherwise. Do you look at the necessity for this differently for a heavily funded company in terms of where you set your goals versus a bootstrap company, or do you look at it all the same?
No, I look at it the same. And I think there's a danger of being funded. Because so bootstrapped entrepreneurs have this constraint that says, okay, we need to work within this constraint to be able to move the company forward. And so it creates this level of discipline. And a lot of times what I've seen in the companies that are heavily funded, there's a lack of discipline. There's a lack of short-term focus. There's so much emphasis on where we're going that they often forget to build the infrastructure for where they need to be right now. And so I look at it exactly the same. And here's another reason why. Once you start building a team as an entrepreneur, there are two things that are the key to your success. One is maintaining the vision of the organization, understanding where it should go strategically, like what is that future going to look like? And then the second one is leading a team. And when you take a team, and I'll share a quick story, like this is easier to share in story. So I think back to 2016 or 17, I was working with an incredibly talented entrepreneur. She's given me permission to share this story. Her name's Natalie Hodson. And when I first met Natalie, she had in the prior year had I think it was a $1.1 million business selling a $39 ebook, one product.
Wow,
so
love that.
You do the math on that, and it's extraordinary, right? And she was running at massive margins. She had a 5 or 6 person team. And when she came to us, she was at this place where she was at $1 million and really trying to figure out what the company was going to do next. And she had outsourced customer service that she wanted to bring in-house. She had her marketing and ads agency was outsourced. She wanted to bring it in-house. And so when she sat down to plan for the first time, she had just hit 1.1 million, and she came to us with a goal of 10. And I was like, okay, so Natalie, how are you going to hit this $10 million goal? And I remember her saying, well, like our team's really excited and, we're committed to it and we feel good about it. And, we really think it would just be amazing if we hit 10 million because we would influence so many people. It's like, okay, Natalie, but what are you going to do next month? Because we're in December. And so January, you're going to set the goal to hit over $800,000 in business. It's about 80% of what you did last year. What do you really realistically think you're going to hit next month? And she looked at everything. She's like, well, we're switching marketing right now and we're making this change with customer service. And so I know next month's going to be kind of rough. I think we'll probably do about 75,000 based on where we sit right now. Like, is there anything else you can do to influence that? Not that I can see, not right now, just based on how much we have going and the team that I have and the constraints that I have. I'm like, okay, Natalie, so at the end of January, you're going to tell your team we missed it by 800,000 because that's about what it's going to be. And now in February, what do you think you're going to hit? So we went through the same conversation. And so at the end of the quarter, I said, doing the math. So you're going to have a company that's about 2.4 million behind on the goal by the end of March. Yeah. How is your team going to feel? And it started like dawning on her that, hey, this is actually punitive. This way that we've been taught I often share with people, I'm a goal achievement expert. I'm not a goal setting expert, because goal setting experts are the guys who walk into the conference, get everybody excited. And they're like, Brad, write down the biggest number you ever thought you could earn. Now really focus on it, get into it, embody it, cross it out and double it. You know what I'm talking about? Like when those guys get on stage, I'm like, I got to go out in the hall. I can't do this, because it's this dogma around setting these massive outcomes is the only way to get there. Well, what happened with Natalie was at the end of that conversation, I said, so, Natalie, think of the conversations you're going to have at the end of each month with your team, telling them it's okay. We're going to get there. Things are going to be okay. How is that going to feel for you? How's that going to feel for them? And she agreed. She's like, it's not going to be fun. I don't want to do that. She goes, so what should I do? I said, well, let's just look at this realistically. If at the end of this year, you could bring customer service in-house, you could fix what's going on with your marketing issues with the agency you have, and hit $1 million, do you think like that would be an effective year if you were able to make those operational changes and still maintain what you're doing? And she's like, based on what's going to happen next month, I think that would be great. And I said, great. So let's set the goal to do the equivalent of what you did last year. And I know that's hard. I know it's hard to set a financial goal not to grow, but let's set the goal to operationally grow this business. Well, what ended up happening was she pulled the target closer. Within the first month, the team figured some stuff out. It actually ended up better than they thought it was. They were ahead of their numbers. And I think by the end of that year, she had hit 2 or 3 million. And because if she had put $10 million out there, every single month, the team feels like it's losing. And you can literally demotivate people with that. So instead, give them a goal that they can achieve. They get so motivated, they'll surpass it. And I make this argument now, having had this conversation and this interaction with hundreds, thousands of entrepreneurs that have all been taught this dogma that if you don't have this goal that's overwhelming and so far afield that you're just not doing it right, that when we finally get them to settle into like pulling the target closer, that's when companies explode.
Yeah, it's certainly a different frame.
It makes people uncomfortable, Brad.
Yeah.
It makes people uncomfortable. You know, there was another entrepreneur I worked with, Sterling Griffin, great guy, still a really close friend of ours. And I remember we were in a conference where he had just come off a Tony Robbins conference. So he had just come off of like the biggest goal you can get and this, and, you know, and it was like an hour of arguing with him in front of the rest of the room in our event where he was like, but I did it this time and I was able to do this and I was homeless at one point and I made $1 million. And I'm like, okay, but Sterling, do you like playing from behind? And he's like, yeah, like if it's not something that's really, you know, out there, then I'm not even going to go after it. And I'm like, okay, so do you like feeling like there's massive pressure on you? And he's like, yeah, I love massive pressure. I'm like, so do you like kind of feeling like you could lose and you're not going to really get there? He's like, yeah. I'm like, your team doesn't like any of that.
Right.
Your team doesn't like any part of that. Your team wants stability. They want to know that they're winning. They want to know that they're doing the right thing. They want to know they have your approval. They want to know that collectively they are moving something forward together. And it finally clicked for him in the conference. But it was funny. Like at one point I made the joke that Sterling had like stepped out to the bathroom. And I'm like, I think he's out there just going, Tony Robbins, Alex Charfen, Tony Robbins, Alex Charfen. Like, who do I listen to? And it was a pretty funny interaction. But same thing for Sterling. Pulled the target closer and had an explosive year.
So, talk to me about communication patterns, because that's another one that certainly, I think one of the funny things that's happened in the last 5 years is Slack.
Yeah.
And there's an entrepreneur in town that has been on the show, Chandler Bolt, who I love.
I know him well. Well, I don't know him well. I know Chandler, though. We've spoken at a couple of events together. Great guy.
Great guy and an operator. Yeah. He's a very dialed operator. One of the things that he said about Slack was and he tells his team that it was built by video game designers. And he said, which of the communication platforms do you think is going to be the most addictive?
Yeah.
It's going to be Slack. And we have a rule internally, which is Slack is for urgent communication. And then we have a separate shenanigans channel where the alerts are turned off. But we do not want it for other things. And it's a deliberate communication choice. But certainly the team does not adhere to this. And that's a consistent point of frustration for me. How do you approach communication? What tools do you use for it? You've kind of given the overarching narrative of predictability, so people know when they're going to get the updates. They know when they're going to hear about things, and that creates some stability, structure, predictability.
Yeah.
What's the rest of it?
So, almost every entrepreneur that we work with comes in saying, I don't want to be in meetings. I don't want to have meetings. And then we have them do a 2-week time study where they write down everything they're doing for 2 weeks. And you know what you see on that 2-week time study? They're in meetings almost constantly. Mm-hmm. And if they're willing to write down every time they're interrupted or every time somebody has got a minute or every time they're putting out a fire, we look at that as another interaction, another meeting. And so they come in saying, I don't want any schedule, any, structure because I want to be free. And that's why I became an entrepreneur. Yeah. That's why I became an entrepreneur. But you know what? I understand because Brad, there was a point in my career early on where I felt the same way. It's like, I don't want stuff on my calendar. That's why I'm an entrepreneur, and I don't want to have to show up to the same thing every week. Like, how routine, how mundane, how boring. But until you realize that it's the process, the structure, the routine that the team relies on to understand this is how we run this company. Like, there's a reason why Google has an all hands over and over and over again, and always has. Everybody knows when they're going to interact with the two founders of the company. There's predictability there. And so when you look at how we lay out a communication structure for an entrepreneur, it's creating predictable times where the team's going to hear from you. And so we have an annual meeting, quarterly meetings, monthly, weekly, and daily. And when we can have an entrepreneur install that structure into their business, where there's a daily huddle, there's weekly commitments, there's a monthly meeting where you look at what part of the quarterly targets are you going to do, and then each quarter you're deciding how you're going to get to that annual goal. What ends up happening is there's this structure, there's this routine where the entire team knows, okay, well, it's the beginning of the month or it's the end of the month. Now we're going to know what we're doing next month. And each week I know exactly what I need to execute. And here's the like magic part of it. If we can get that structure installed in between that 1 to 3 million or a little bit after that, what happens is at 10 million, we pull the entrepreneur or earlier, we pull them out of the weekly meetings. And then you go a little bit further, pull them out of the monthly meetings. And now you have an entrepreneur, a visionary who's involved in annual and quarterly, and then as needed for strategy. And that's really where visionaries like grow like crazy and get really excited about running a business, because we've extracted them from that tactical structure and they're operating almost exclusively strategically.
How does that play into the communication side of things?
So,
with the rest of it, right?
You mean with the rest of the team?
Yeah. Look, there's a lot of daily shit that happens, right? So there are fires in everybody's mind, whether they're actual fires or not. Somebody walks in the door, asks a question.
Yeah. So I think that the reason why there is so much ad hoc communication that happens in most organizations is because the only structure provided is ad hoc. There's no time to handle the things that you need to handle. Like, I'll give you just one simple example. So one of the sections of a daily huddle that we encourage entrepreneurs to have, especially with a smaller team, is critical issues. And a critical issue is an issue that's brought up in a huddle, in the daily huddle, where this is something that's going to prevent me from doing my job. And so here's what happens. If somebody has an issue on Monday and they're like, oh man, I don't know how to handle this. In most organizations, they're going to go straight and try and get it figured out. They're going to start communicating, slacking somebody, calling somebody, texting somebody, emailing, whatever it is. If you build a habit where every day people can get their problems heard, and then right after the huddle it's taken care of, now that becomes a 24-hour cycle where issues are brought up one time in a daily basis. For an individual team member, if they don't have a weekly check-in with somebody who's above them on the org chart, with the chain of command on the org chart, then they're constantly like, here's an issue I have, here's a challenge I have, here's a question I need to have answered. And if you build in a structure where each week they're meeting with somebody, they start asking the question, do I need to have this answered now, or can I wait until Wednesday on my weekly check-in? And what happens is, when you build that structure, whether it's daily, weekly, or monthly, you end up in a place where instead of everybody feeling like they need to solve something right away, you've now provided a window where they can get those things solved, and a lot of that ad hoc communication in a company calms down. I look at the expenditure of resources in an organization as one of the most important things to look at. And when you look at the average organization that has something like Slack, and you look at their metadata for Slack, it's thousands of messages in a month, sometimes hundreds of messages per person within an organization. If you can, and what does that mean? That means that people probably aren't working for more than a few minutes at a time without an interruption. They're probably not working more than a half hour or 45 minutes at a time without messaging somebody about something.
Right.
And so if you can get people to work more autonomously, more independently, and have the windows where they can get those issues answered, you dramatically increase the efficiency of the entire organization.
I love the idea of that. One of my challenges is I don't think that it's just, I believe that it's not just the tool being in front of them. We are quite literally, as a society, conditioning people to chirp, right? To grab the device and do something, even if they don't have a fucking question. I find myself midday just grabbing my phone in a moment where I get distracted or don't know exactly what to do. I'm like, my phone. I'll check my messages. Right? It's a horrible habit, but certainly your staff is conditioned to do that as well. So how do you break the pattern there, if anything? Right? Is it good enough for you to say, hey, we've got a space daily and weekly to solve these things? Let's move to leadership. From a leadership perspective, how do you encourage them to say, don't fucking slack me?
Yeah. Well, I think in most organizations, we don't really realize, or in most organizations, there's not intelligence as to what people are capable of and what people are capable of when they're not in the middle of this massive set of disorganization and interruption. There's a ton of research on this, but one of the studies that I saw was that when you are working on a task, if you get interrupted, it takes 12 minutes for you to get back to the same level of focus that you had on that task.
Yeah.
And so if you look at how most people are working in most organizations today, there's never more than 12 minutes of focus. So they're constantly in a place of lack of focus, lack of attention, and lack of ability. And you can take a really good, intelligent person who's right for a position and interrupt them all day, and they will look like they're broken and they look like they don't know what they're doing. And so it's a combination of things. One, it's creating a solid weekly plan for every team member. And our system does this. We call it kind of a waterfall system where we know what every team member is responsible for, what they need to do on a weekly basis, and we can see what they've been able to get accomplished. And that level of granularity of going from like, here's the quarter, here's what we're doing in the month, here's what you're responsible for, but you can see how it ties into everything else the company is doing. That creates a ton of focus for people. And so we have an open dialogue around like, hey, we expect you to be unavailable and getting this stuff done. We don't want you on call 24/7. If there's a huge issue, we'll text you, like turn the alerts off on Slack and turn the alerts off on everything. Like stay out of your email, go get really solid work done. So first, it's a dialogue and a culture of getting really like having the time to focus and get work done. And then on the other side of that is making sure that individual knows that they don't have to be on call 24/7. I think one of the things that, and maybe not even 24/7, but they don't have to be on call from like 9 to 5 where you can interrupt them at any time. If there's an emergency, you can always text somebody and I'll get around having alerts turned off. But I think what you just said is so important. Slack was designed by video game designers, and we are driving human attention down and human ability to focus down across the board. Yeah. The incidence of the symptoms of ADD or ADHD they've grown thousands of percentiles every year. We're not talking over a decade here. We're seeing like 1,000% increase in ADD in children, 1,000% increase in ADD in adults. There's now this new thing called late onset attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Well, what is late onset? It is conditioning. It's, 20-second videos on TikTok, it's Reels, it's Twitter, it's all these things where now instead of like focusing on something and getting really good work done, we're in this place where it's like, what can I fill my mind with for the next 30 seconds? Right. And I do the same thing, Brad. Like I reach for my phone and I'll have it in my hand and I'll think, what are you doing? There's absolutely no point to picking this up right now. So I do a digital detox. When I start doing that too much, I'm like, okay, I just need to get away from it for 48 hours and I'll leave it alone for a weekend, or I'll take a Friday, Saturday, Sunday and try to touch it as little as humanly possible. Because I feel like what we're doing to ourselves as entrepreneurs and what we're doing to our team is we're lowering the ability to focus. And when you lower the ability to focus, you lower the ability to do good work. I think this feeling of like, oh, I'll be inspired by something that I'm looking at. Maybe it happens every once in a while, but where really extraordinary work comes from is the ability to focus and to think deeply and to really put your time and effort into it.
No question. I think that's also part of the value of, for me, of reading.
Yeah.
And I don't mean listening to audiobooks.
Reading. With a book with pages.
Yes.
Yeah, with paper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that I'm stuck there.
Yeah.
And that creates a necessity to focus and visualize, right? You have to use your brain to visualize, and you can get the visualization part from audio too, certainly. But you can't get the focus from that. Yeah. The activity has to be engaging in one direct area, not to lose that. I also take sort of tremendous issue with this notion of adult onset ADD or the label in general.
Yeah.
It's just not a helpful label. It's like, chemical deficiency aside, just fucking focus.
Yeah.
Yes. And as soon as you put a label on it that you are not responsible, it is something happening to you, then I choose to live my life in a way where I would rather put the responsibility on me for what can I do to alter this? And like we were talking about before, ultimately, that is mindset for me. That is, what do I do in my head? And then how do I create the environment to change the pattern?
The tactics. It's the mindset backed up by tactics.
You got it. Yep.
Yeah. Just for the record, I take issue with the majority of psychological labels, and by the way, I've done a tremendous amount, like I've gone down way too much of a rabbit hole on psychological labeling, because in my events, when I talk to entrepreneurs, everyone in the room has been diagnosed with something.
Right.
And there's no one who's unscathed. And when you look at the difference between the DSM-3, which is the diagnostics, whatever the DSM stands for, but it's basically the book of everything wrong with you.
Yes.
But it's the psychological diagnoses, and they're put together by people who are funded by drug companies. And so when you look at the DSM-3, 4, and 5, by the time you get to 5, you can find something for everybody. Like everybody's going to have some type of disorder or diagnosis or something, and probably need a medication. And so I think that today, especially when it comes to the entrepreneurial personality type, we label people way too quickly. Mm-hmm. And there's this massive profit motivation there. Like most of those new labels that come up that are created with the clear intention of creating a diagnosis and a prescription that becomes a lifetime habit. Mm-hmm. And, I help entrepreneurs all the time get off of those prescriptions, because there is no such thing as a proven chemical deficiency in the human mind. That was a theory that was created in the 60s and 70s and then just continued to be brought forward. It's now completely been discredited. And what we're trying to do, and I think in a lot of cases, is take people who are extraordinary and make them like everybody else. And so, sorry, I got on a little soapbox.
No.
But for anybody out there who's had a diagnosis, like, I want you to know, if you've had a diagnosis or your kids had a diagnosis, or they're telling you something that's wrong with you, here's what I can tell you definitively. Somebody out there in history has been just like you, just like me, has had those diagnoses, has overcome them, and gone on to change the world. And you can too, and you don't need a pill to do it.
Yes. I love that. And I think that for me, a frame that helps me with that, and with many, many, many other things, is I tend to not lean into absolute narratives or beliefs. Yeah. And when somebody says, I am this, first off, the language is fucked.
It's terrible.
As soon as you define yourself as something, it takes away control.
Yeah, you've created constraint.
100%. And a better approach is, I currently feel like this.
Yeah, or I have symptoms that are considered.
Or I have been this in the past, right? But the other is, even if you have that label, if you can keep the absolute view out of it and say, maybe there's another approach to this. Yeah. It's not absolutely true. Sometimes it's true, right? Yeah. Most of the time it's true. I don't know. But that window allows my mind to be open for other solutions to that problem 100%. As well.
So, and even if you look at the labels, Brad, in the psychology industry, in the industry of the people who are creating the labels, on most labels, the consensus is about 50-50. Like, no joke. So half of the people think this is absolutely crazy and we shouldn't do anymore. And the other half are like, this is absolutely the reality. And so nowhere else in medicine is there a 50-50 consensus. Like, when you go in for triple bypass surgery, there's not somebody else going, no, do not do that. It's only in the world of psychology and psychotropic drugs that you get like that low of a consensus on most things. And when that DSM-4 and the DSM-5 that I was just talking about, it's kind of hilarious to watch. The DSM-4 was published, and the editor of that, the one who drove the editing of the DSM-4, completely discredited the book that came next. And so it's this industry with way too much controversy, not anywhere near enough consensus. And so I think if you've gotten any of those labels, take a good hard thought about maybe disregarding it and just knowing that you're an extraordinary person. Because if you got labeled with something, you're not average, and average people don't change the world. So back to leadership, if you are not an average person, and how you get people to follow a system, and how you get them to go in the direction that you want the company to go in. From a communication pattern, let's just go back to the Slack thing and trying to snap to grid to better communication. What I heard, I think, was management and leadership around permission to focus. Yeah.
Permission to make their own choices, stay in their box. And if they don't stay in their role, and if they don't know a particular answer, if it's okay and not going to break things, to make their best decision.
Yeah.
And if it's not absolutely urgent, then you bring it up at your daily stand up or at your weekly meeting or whatever it is.
Yeah. So here's the big shift that we have a framework that kind of shares this shift. So most entrepreneurs, most businesses operate in a world of transactional management. And transactional management is what every entrepreneur complains about. In fact, I talk to entrepreneurs all the time that have this belief that they can't have a team because they're like, I tried to have people work for me. It didn't work out. It drove me crazy. It was more work than when I was doing it on my own. I was so frustrated with them, and normally they're like, I have one person who I can work with, and that's the only person, or, an assistant or somebody. And it's because they've only worked in the world of transactional management. And transactional management is quite literally telling people what to do, checking that it got done, telling them what to do again, checking that it got done, telling them what to do. And as entrepreneurs, that is for a visionary, that's like the heaviest lift there is. But that's where most people exist because they don't have a better outcome. They don't have a better way to do it. The shift from transactional management to transformational leadership. And by the way, when visionaries say they're bad managers, I agree. But visionaries are extraordinary leaders. If you see a visionary in any room, usually they take over the conversation. They're natural leaders. And so the framework for leadership to go from to do, done, which is, it's basically micromanagement, and it's incredibly painful. The converse to that is give people really clear outcomes. And in most businesses, people don't have real clear outcomes. They have like, here's what we need you to do. And here's some of the things we want to be able to do. And here's where the company's going. Usually they're going from like some type of, if they have a plan, it's a 90-day plan. They're trying to execute week by week or day to day. And that's difficult for most people to understand what they're doing. But if you create clear outcomes for the company, clear outcomes for each project, clear outcomes for the department that somebody works in, and then clear outcomes for the individual, here's what happens. You go from telling people what to do, to checking that it got done, to telling them what to do again, to creating really clear outcomes where now they know where they're going. Then you can coach their success along the way, and you get what we call leveraged results. And here's what I mean by leveraged results. If people are pursuing an outcome, they're typically way more engaged than that if they're being told to do something. So the difference between, we want you to do X, Y, Z, and we want you to get this result is massive. And so when you start delegating results by giving clear outcomes, and then people won't fail because when they need help, you create a window for them to get that help. Then you start duplicating decision making. The people on the team become more intelligent. They know how to drive towards an outcome, and you're out of that transactional management. You're in this place of transformational leadership.
I know we're coming on time here, but before we wrap, can you give some, can you dive into that a little bit in terms of tactically how you execute that? So when you create a plan, how granular do you get? How much guidance do you give or direction do you give to ride the line between delegating an outcome versus delegating a task?
Well, it depends on what stage of growth you are in the company. So if you're in that $1 million place, most people are delegating tasks when they could be delegating outcomes, when they to a one-on-one person. But as the company grows, you actually go through this massive shift as an entrepreneur. So at around 1 million, you're delegating your time. You're saying, here's all the things I'm doing with my time. How can I take this time back by giving somebody else this task that I do? And typically it's going to take them longer than you. You're the person who sees the future. They're not seeing it. They're going to need a little bit more time. Well, you go from delegating time to then the next step, right when you start to understand how to delegate time, you need to delegate success, because you get to that $3 to $10 million place. And if you're trying to make all of the success happen, it's challenging. You now have to go from here's this thing that I'm doing to giving it to somebody else to now saying, here's this outcome I want. I need to explain it to somebody with a level of clarity that they can go get that outcome. And they can build the plan to get there. I'll see it. I'll be able to be involved in it. But I start delegating success, which is incredibly hard for entrepreneurs. About half of the businesses in the United States will never break. Over half of the business in the United States will never break $100,000. And when you look at, I know.
Crazy.
It's crazy, isn't it? And the reason I believe is that entrepreneurs hold on to doing everything so tightly that they get to this place where it's like they don't want to break anything. So they're this tiny little business and they're kind of like stuck there and they don't delegate anything. So first step is delegating time, then delegating success. And then if you're running a business that's large enough, then it's giving up your own autonomy of time. You get to the $10 to $30 million range and your team should be telling you where they need you. It flips around. They now manage your time. Mm-hmm. You give them X number of hours a week and they tell you where they need you. And so early on, you're giving people task-based, hourly-based, like this is the kind of stuff that I'm doing and I need you to do it. And then you transition to delegating success, which means putting together a quick plan and approving that plan and then having somebody go out and, like you said, have the autonomy to make decisions, have the autonomy to make mistakes. Know that yes, people around you might not do it exactly like you would do it, but you can coach them on what you want to see happen. But then also let people work, let people get things done. And then you get to the place where, you know, a lot of our members are, where we call it running your business from the passenger seat. You're not driving meetings. You're not driving outcomes. You're not driving every project. You're actually in the passenger seat of the business where you can act as a coach and a consultant and the visionary that you are and not have to be so taken up by the day to day that now the team tells you where they want you.
Yep. I like that idea. Someday for Brad. Someday.
Well, we should talk, Brad.
Well, Alex Charfen, it's been fucking awesome talking. It's always awesome talking, man. It's always good to see you.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Where can people find out more about you if they want to?
Well, if you're a podcast listener, I have a podcast called Momentum for the Entrepreneurial Personality Type. And it's, if you go to momentumpodcast.com, you can listen to it on any of the platforms. We just crossed 3 million downloads, which was super cool.
Love it.
Yeah, I was pretty stoked about that. And it's quick, like 10 to 15 minute episodes where each one solves a problem. And if you want to, you can go to my website, mylastname.com, so charfen.com. And we have a search engine there where if you're experiencing any issue in your business, type in the issue and you're going to pull up podcasts that you can listen to. That's a great place to start.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Cool. I will be checking it out.
Thanks, man.
Love it, man. Until next time.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. I appreciate you having me today.
If you learned one thing on this episode, share it with another entrepreneur. They need to hear it. Also subscribe so that new episodes just show up on your phone. It's a lot easier that way. And if you want the really good stuff, check out our free BAM! Tactics and Strategies course. It's where we curate the best tips, tricks, and tools that our guests know, whether they've shared them on the podcast or not. Just go to beyondamill.com. You'll also find previous episodes and show notes at beyondamill.com.